Good afternoon. I'm James T. Kirk, Captain of the United Starship Enterprise. I've come from the future of 2270 to tell you about my ultra-fantastic life that was full of action, adventure, drama, daring deeds, and above all, a courageous spirit that overflowed into all my exploits. Against all odds, I managed to cheat death, winning time and time again, through sheer cunning, outright guts, blind luck, and a can-do attitude. I was born March 22nd, 2233, on a shuttle escaping the starship Kelvin, which is under attack by hostile Romulan forces. My father, George Kirk, was commanding the Kelvin and heroically went down with it. James was the name of my maternal grandfather, Tiberius for my paternal grandfather. I was raised by my single widowed mother, Winona Kirk, on a farm in Riverside, Iowa. Although I had an older brother named George Samuel, but he died later on in life and left 3 children. Although I lived on Earth for a time in 2246 when I was 13, I lived on Tarsus 4, where there was a severe food shortage starving our 8,000-member colony. Governor Kodos then, in order to save a portion of his colony, decided to massacre 4,000 colonists, least able or least desirable to live. I was a witness to the slaughter. Back on Earth and living with my mom, I was a rebellious teenager, always speeding on hover scooters, racing solar cars, and getting into bar fights. I was contentious and reckless. I was a rebel without a clue. Then in 2252, when I was 19, I decided to enlist in Starfleet's training academy. I was inspired by my late father's heroism and persuaded by Captain Christopher Pike. And at this academy, I would meet, befriend, and personally get to know numerous men and women who would later on be by my side as my crewmates under my command and go on countless of OMG ×3 outrageous adventures. I first met and befriended Dr. Leonard McCoy, or Bones. He would later become my chief medical officer and would always later on be nurturing, protecting, and healing my crewmates and me, telling us all about our mental and physical limitations, plus helping me get out of jams. Later on, he would become my best friend, my health and emotional advisor, and would come with me on my excursions off ship. And here are some of our classmate pictures. Here I am, there's Bones McCoy, and this all leads to Mr. Spock with an unpronounceable first name. Actually, Spock was a half-human, half-Vulcan hybrid, and I first met Spock in chemistry class at the academy, where he would come up to me, raise his hand, and say, "Live long and phosphorus." He would become my right-hand man, my chief science officer, my really right-hand person, telling me all about, giving me logical, rational, science-based info and intel for me to make good decisions. He was loyal, trustworthy, became my best friend, and always had spot-on target reasoning, and was most needed on my excursions off-ship. Although he was a bit odd and distant at times, we both agreed that the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few. And I also had at the academy a tormentor, a bully, named Finnegan. He would come and egg me on, trying to fight me all the time because he didn't like me, but there's always a bully everywhere you go, isn't there? And at this academy, I would meet my other future teammates as I got to know Kuro Sulu, which was my chief helmsman. And I got to know Pavel Chekhov, my helmsman. My navigator, Lieutenant Noyota Uhura, language and communication specialist. She was fluent in 7 different languages. And Chief Engineering Officer Montgomery Scott, or Scotty, would work in the engineering section. All these men and women would be on the bridge helping me run the ship, giving me advice. So yes, we had a multicultural crew specifically designed to address racial diversity, tolerance, and equality, making a cultural utopia. During my multi-year training command position at the Academy, I confronted the Kobayashi-Maru scenario, which is a computer simulation designed to test the student's reaction to a no-win rescue situation. A student in this simulation became involved in rescuing members of a doomed cargo ship while all the time being surrounded by hostile Klingon forces. I was defeated twice by this program, but the third time I reprogrammed the system to allow me to win. This made me the only cadet to ever beat this unbeatable scenario. Of course, I got called on the rug on this. There was a trial held for me, but when urgent matters in the Federation came up, the case was dismissed. Actually, the higher-ups secretly admired the way that I cheated defeat and moved on from that. This is the commander that they were actually looking for, someone who could forget the rules and just win instead. Rules are one thing, but winning is another thing. I was also trained in psychology and hand-to-hand combat, and had a style called Kirk Fu, which is dramatic body blows to my opponents. And as you can see, like this and like this, very melodramatic. And I graduated in the top 5% of my class, but I was unorthodox, rash, and untested. And then I was promoted to be an ensign and worked on the Starship Republic. I earned a citation for a peacekeeping mission, and I also was promoted to lieutenant junior grade. That's because I was the first person to discover a place not too far from here. It's a mysterious place that scientists were just shocked to find out there was no life on it past 8:30 at night. And then I came back to Starfleet headquarters, and became a student instructor. All kinds of things, manuals to learn, a cookbook, marriage manual, and a bar guide. And yes, our stiff drinks really made you spaced out. You see, in the future, we became a federalized planet. That is, there were no countries, no boundaries, no territorial disputes. That's because of a worldwide war we had in 2272 that was based on intolerance and greed. We had to all go through hell to get to heaven. So later on, after this war, we ended bigotry, we stopped using money, and all races got along to make a better society. It would become an idealistic, futuristic Camelot. And then in 2259, when I was 26, I was promoted to be lieutenant and assigned to work on the Starship Farragut, which was a destroyer. And I survived an attack by a dichromium cloud creature on that planet that killed my CO, Captain Garabek, and 200 of my crewmates. Actually, I was commanding the phaser banks, passed out, and when I came to, all dozens of my crewmates were lying dead in front of me. It was a traumatic experience. And then in 2264, when I was 31, I became captain. I was promoted to be captain of the Starship Enterprise. I took over from a seriously injured Captain Christopher Pike, as first seen in the 1966 pilot, The Cage and the Menagerie. Pike would get seriously messed up here, seriously injured, and I took over from him. I would become the youngest Starfleet commander ever at age 31. And I would have a meteoric rise with Starfleet, and have a 40-year career, and was cited 17 times in my career for different violations for bucking the system for going my way. You see, the risks I took outweighed the rules. So I created my own reality, inventing it on the fly. Sometimes I don't know what I'm supposed to do. Rather, I know what I can do. I run on adrenaline, testosterone, primal gut hunches, innate feelings, sheer iron will, and an always take it to the limit attitude. I had a 5-year mission with Starfleet to explore and study new worlds, and to boldly go where no man has gone before. Well, this is rather a sexist and hopeless way to say something, so we changed it back then, because we changed it to, instead of no man goes before, we changed it to know where no person goes before. Well, person is sexist, it ends in son, and boldly is drama queen language. So we changed it to go where no perper has gone before. Now, doesn't that sound exciting? Mm-hmm. All right. So, before I tell you about my outrageous adventures, my way over the top, train insane or remain the same, let loose like a deuce, no risk it, no biscuit adventures, let me tell you about the Starship Enterprise. She was a Constitution-class starship, commissioned in 2245 and built in that year above the orbiting shipyards above San Francisco. Robert April was her first captain for 10 years, and then Pike took over, and then after him it was me from 2264 to 69, and from 2271 to the early 70s. She was 1,000 feet long, had a crew of 430, and was 35 stories tall, and had the ability to break off in case of an impending problem. The saucer would break off from the mainframe if there was ever an extreme emergency. She was built to be on a humanitarian, utilitarian, peacekeeping mission. Isn't she beautiful? But sometimes diplomacy didn't work. So in order to defend ourselves, we had to have some weapons. One of them was the photon torpedo fired from the bow of our ship. It looked like this, and what it has inside of them is a propellant and a charge. And if you scoop all this out and put a top on it, you can actually put a body in here, maybe like was done with one of the Khan movies, to hide some of his accomplices, or even to put Spock in later on, kind of like a casket. But it was mainly meant for torpedoes. And phasers fired from the front of our ship for more direct pinpoint hits to vulnerable exposed areas on enemy vessels. And there are many sections of the Enterprise, because it's so big, and I'd like to go into them with you so you get to know the ship. Actually, it had 14 different science labs, 6 different recreation areas where I sometimes played 3D chess with Spock, officer quarters, crew cabins, a later made holodeck to simulate other places, the bridge where I worked, an engineering section with Mr. Scott in charge of dozens and dozens of men and women, a sick bay with Bones McCoy and Nurse Christine Chappell to help out. Here's Bones McCoy working on Spock's father, Sarek, for instance. They had green blood, by the way. And it also had a brig to have prisoners in. This is Khan. And a transporter room, a chapel where people could get married or religious services, and a security detail with their own room. Of course, it had an observation deck, my place I worked in, and endless long corridors here, shown here. Miles of them, actually. And we also had a shuttle that would be taken in case we want to leave the ship to go somewhere else. And it had a Starbucks in the cafeteria where you could order a hyperdrive Venti Moco Frappuccino. And those doors, well, they made this annoying whoosh sound all the time and sounded like a librarian telling you to be quiet all the time. Boy, they were very annoying with the noise. But we have doors like this nowadays, don't we? And the ship runs on dilithium crystals that are mined underground on other planets and are more valuable than diamonds. They exist in more than 4 dimensions at one time, and they're in the engineering section. They take a great deal of room up, and they are used to help generate warp, specifically they regulate the annihilation of matter and antimatter in our warp core or an explosion would occur. Like I said, they're helpful in speed generating warp. And what is speed? Well, impulse power is at 45,000 miles per second, about 1/4 light speed. Warp factor 1 is light speed, or 186,282 miles per second, and thereafter warp is Q. So warp factor 2 is 8 times the speed of light. Warp factor 7 is 343 times the speed of light, and warp factor 8 is 532 times the speed of light. But no one, and at this point in time, I'm going to tell you that this would make us be able to get to the nearest star, Alpha Proxima, in just a few hours. But no one ever tells you how they slow down in space. Well, you have to put your engines in reverse to counteract the force that you went out there with. In other words, using Newton's third law. So that's how we slow down in space. Otherwise, you blow past the planet in about 1/100th of a second. Then you'd be having problems. Okay, the transporters, that was in the engineering section, and Scotty worked them and his crew. They would take an object or a person and break it down into atoms, and then redirect those atoms, that is, beam it to another location. All these atoms would then be scrambled in space and then reassembled back to the location that you want them to, like this. Actually, I never said, beam me up, Scotty, but Jim beam me up, Scotty. And next time, beam down my clothes. She's just beautiful. I have to fall in love with her all the time. Phasers were invented by teenage prodigy John Harrington in the 23rd century. John got the name of the product when his parents were telling him he was going through a phase. These were modeled after your first stun guns or really police tasers back in your time. And here's mine. Of course, it doesn't look like a garden attachment. Well, a garden hose attachment, but then that's another story. Actually, yeah, this is what they look like. This is the evolution of the phaser back in my time, or ahead in my time. And they actually had phaser rifles also for more pinpoint, a little more power on them. The communicators we used on our ship were really modified flip phones from your time period. We were able to call from other planets, call to our ship using these kind of phones. Later on, these communicators would be pinned onto the emblems on the shirts of the Star Trek ensigns and people working there. Our sick bay was really named after your eBay of the time, and researching the history of your time, E was for encephalitis of the brain, for bidding on dumb, useless things. Also, Uhura and Spock also had communication devices in their ears. This was modeled from your Bluetooth that we use now. The ship's mainframe computer had a female voice to it that we used to access essential information on the bridge. And this was modeled from your Siri or Alexa or even Google products from today. A female voice is easier to listen to and more maternal in nature. And the ship's slanted control panels, well, they were modeled after your space shuttle missions back in the late 20th century and early 21st century. They were slanted like this for easy access and looked like this on our ship. And the chair that I would sit in, well, that was modeled after your recliners that you would relax or read or watch TV in. We got my chair at the Galactic Space Rooms to Go store on Regulus 1. The tricorder that Bones used really did quite a number of functions. He had a medical kit that would inject shots in stressed out crew members called hypospray, very much like what you would put in your nose nowadays. An injection was forced into a person under air pressure for vaccines or adrenaline when needed. And special nose sprays comes close to this today. Owens also used this tricorder here, which are handheld medical devices to instantly diagnose diseases and bodily problems. You might recognize this from your primitive digital thermometer or your tracking device for your heartbeat and heart rate monitors. Actually, NASA today has a portable biological lab similar to this, and fitness trackers down here. Plus, we used interactive video screens, much like your Zoom today. So all this sounds very familiar to you, doesn't it? It all comes in today's world. And I also mentioned a star date and told of a captain's log. No, not this kind of log, but what we were going through. And you got the idea from the time the use of blogs, which were bored people saying blah, blah. We also had a tractor beam to pull objects into the ship's cargo bay, and we would pull all kinds of goodies. We'd sometimes have a tractor beam war with other ships trying to pull in goodies. But it didn't look like this, but that's how a tractor beam works. There's a linear gravitational beam to accumulate objects. We also had a deployable invisible defense shield or deflector shield to protect the ship from attacks and look like this. And oftentimes they would tell you about the ship's deflector shield that would be decreasing in the amount of it that you could use when they're under attack. Now the Klingons were really stand-ins for your Soviets of the 1960s. They were hostile, gruff, warlike, not very fun sometimes, and they really had a lot of Klingon phrases. Revenge is a dish best served cold, and you may eat dinner, but if you think you may be dinner. But those Klingon women were hot. They had that raggy hair, a lot of mascara, high foreheads with ridges. They looked like greaser girls in heat. And that Klingon language is really difficult to learn. It always looks and sounds like the Jewish alphabet. Like, oh, yeah. They always sound so constipated when they speak. But actually, there's a far remote village out here that does speak Klingon, since they're so remote that they have a hard time keeping up with them. The original Star Trek series ran from September of 1966 to 69, with 79 episodes, 29 the first season, 26 the second season, and 24 the third. And by the end of the third season, they had to cancel it in May of 69. So, there was a 5-year mission with this that many of you watched on TV, and my crew and I would encounter alien worlds, new life forms, both hostile and friendly human-like people or forms, plus solve problems like straits, threats, and skirmishes on distant worlds. Most of the adventures included my trusted crew and me trying to outwit and outmaneuver some kind of twisted, malicious plot against our Federation. We would frequently run into these problems on our journeys, racing against time and threatening dire consequences. Through 79 episodes, 7 Hollywood movies, and 3 reboot movies, I ran the gamut. Problems were solved involving diplomacy, compromise, trickery, deception, sheer boldness, bravado, mind games, and a willingness to do good, resulting in a positive end game. Speaking of trickery, when confronted by hostile adversaries, I would often use the old Jedi mind trick and say, "These are not the droids you are looking for." These weekly episodal encounters could be lumped into 5 different categories. The first category would be powerful, visible, and unseen supernatural forces acting upon us. These forces may be directed by highly intelligent species where we are forced to do unsavory things like fight between ourselves or have all kinds of nasty sayings between ourselves. This might include fighting amongst ourselves or using psychological ploys with my crew. Often my crew became coerced pawns being manipulated and threatened by cruel, omnipotent powers. We were at the mercy of these powerful forces. The second category would include diseases, infections, and contaminated environments, like these kind of things, spores sent from these flowers, and mind-altering states of sickness that induced chaos, and it made people either get sick or have physical or mental problems. And the third category would include madmen, like scientists, doctors, or leaders of other inhabitants of other planets seeking control, revenge upon us, or the ship's material supplies and personnel. Khan was one such example that we will talk about. So we ran into these kind of aliens in the past. Oh, like Gorn here, a man who ran through the mines chasing me. This was on the original Menagerie, or the first episode, or a man pretending to be somebody else. The other kind of villains, like a Klingon villain, Harry Mudd, 19th century composer, different kinds. This is from the rebooted movie here, this gentleman. And the next category, the fourth category, would be machines, like computers or sophisticated alien devices that we ran into and ran amok, posing a threat. These machines somehow went tragically astray, causing significant hardship and problems with my crew. So sometimes we would run into these kind of situations where technology would run amok. The fifth category would be intergalactic flights, use of diplomacy, and playing politics with other worldly societies. Our prime directive is not to interfere with other civilizations. We were there to save indigenous species. We can only observe but not change their outcomes with new technology or innovations. And there were many parallels and plots associated with 20th century Earth, medieval Earth, and even ancient civilizations during the Star Trek episodes. We got entangled, my crew got in entanglements with fighter pilots, hippies, Indians, the American Wild West, gangsters, 18th century music composers, Abraham Lincoln, shown here, warlords, medieval societies, or ancient Greek and Roman scenarios. Sometimes we ran into the all too familiar situations prevalent in your 1960s, like the counterculture movement, people trying to find an Eden, a better place, for instance, and racism and oppressive societies. These all came up. There was one about racism, I don't know if you remember this one, where a man came on board and there were two men. One was half black and half white, but they had one guy was black on this side and white on this side. The other guy was white on this side and black on this side, and they had a problem with racism, and they couldn't understand it, so we tried to help them out. For instance, there were ploys involved for the control and for dilithium crystals. Many times we received a distress call and then investigated or bumped into some kind of ongoing fracas on a planet or in space. For instance, in season 1, we ran into villains like a salt-craving killer, a telepathic teenager, madmen, rulers, conmen Harry Mudd, hostile androids, insane criminals and their doctors, evil geniuses, aliens who could shape-shift and distort reality, genocidal mass murderers, attacking Romulans with cloaking devices, machines that create illusions, evil giants. Here's Mr. Mudd, who comes in twice, an alien-type dog here. This was a salt-craving creature. This is one of the Menagerie when my captain before, he got really injured. And this is the carbonite maneuver. This is where a man was pretending to be an evil person, but really wasn't. My crew became unwilling combatants. We had problems with psychotic rulers, superhuman warlords, computers that create war, hostile alien animals, dealings and wars with Klingons, time-traveling madmen, all-powerful unseen forces that create alternate worlds and uncontrollable creatures that destroy their hosts. And these are some of the ships we would run into. A cloaking device. And in season 2, we got familiar with Spock's Vulcan world, tradition and culture, historical altered situations, space probes gone berserk, unfriendly natives, a doomsday machine, creatures that control matter, mysterious energy fields, diplomatic skullduggery, rulers with personal squabbles, very rapid aging, phantom evil creatures, tribbles, and we would run into these situations like this. Here's this one. Surely a very powerful force would create images from our own mind. We would land on a planet, and I would run into my nemesis, Finnegan. Remember him? And on this place, and other people would run into situations, people that they once knew but weren't really there in the first place. It was kind of a mind-altered game someone was playing on us. This is, here I am dealing with Khan, right here. And Trouble with Triples, you guys remember those? We had giant space amoebas in season 2, hijacking my mind, a computer that controls the ship, and interstellar espionage agents. In season 3, we got involved with a Romulan cloaking device, misguided scientists, flare-ups with Klingons, a web around the ship, telekinetic super alien race, time-accelerated beings, aliens that, social class problems, racism, someone trying to take control of the ship, space storms, women that can kill by touching. Here are some of them from the original Star Trek. This one right here interests me, and this is the wink of an eye. Aliens came on board, but we couldn't see them because they existed in a very fast way of living. That means they did things so fast, you couldn't even see them. And they sounded like mosquitoes when they talked, but we couldn't figure out what was going on. Later, we were able to work with them, and they were able to fix our ship. So we ran into these kind of creatures, people who live in a different time element than we do. Here's a Klingon ship and what they look like. And I went through the gamut of emotions, from shock to anger, and yes, I even took ballet classes because I like to be on my toes. And in case you're wondering about the planets we encountered and beamed down upon, we used a classification system. This system measured pressure, temperature, gravity, atmospheric makeup, and surface solidity. The vast planets were Class M planets, or Earth-like planets that we would run into. However, there were other kind of planets. Class C planet, geoactively inactive. Class U, ultraviolet, ultra giant. Class P planets for extremely cold glaciated ones. And very hot planets, also a Class T planet. There was also a D-class planet for deserts, and an A-class planet for geothermal ones. Additionally, here's what Spock's planet Vulcan looks like. We went there a few times to go there. Spock would actually go back and forth numerous times because his parents, Spock's parents, lived there. His mother Amanda, his father Sarek, and here's Spock making his debut on Vulcan Idol. So here he is right here on Vulcan. As a writer in your 20th century, Ernest Hemingway once said that all American literature stems from Huckleberry Finn by Mark Twain. And that is, Star Trek was very much like it. They're really a buddy movie. That is, I'm really Huck Finn. The raft Huck was on was really the Enterprise. The water, the Mississippi River he floated down upon was really space. His slave friend in the book, Jim, could be any one of my teammates and crewmates like Sulu, Spock, Uhura. And they would often go down this river and then bump into other towns, getting into all kinds of problems. that they would run into. And this is like us going to another planet. So it's very much like that. You can also think of Star Trek like a human body. That is, I'm really the body, but different parts of it are other people in Star Trek. Like Spock would be the head, for instance. Uhura would be the ears and mouth communication. For the locomotion, walking somewhere, well, that would be helmsman Sulu and Chekhov. And for the engineering, that is how the heart works and all the blood pumping, well, that would be Scotty. So you can think of it that way too, kind of like analogies about the way things are. So I thought that was a good parable to use about Hemingway. Truth be told, in 2260, before I was captain, I had a romantic relationship with Dr. Carol Marcus. She earned a doctorate in applied physics and became a weapons specialist. She was on the Enterprise before I came captain from 2259 to 2260. And we had a son named David born in 2261 and then separated. David grew up with his mom immersed in science research, and Carol was later involved in secretive advanced genetic revitalization. More about him in a minute. After so many heart-pounding adventures, narrow escapes, and stressful situations, I started feeling worn, old, frayed, and obsolete. My middle-aged growing pains involved weight gain, reading glasses, and while reading old classics like Charles Dickens. This winning at all costs took its toll on me because in order to get something in life, you have to give up something. So I had to give up some things. I could have been one of those suburban dads who had a desk job and come home to a family, but I decided, well, I was going to do something different with my life. So I got something out of that with all these adventures, but then I lost some intimacy and doing things with a family that I could have had. I never knew my son, as Carol kept me apart. David earned a doctorate at age 23, working with his mom on Project Genesis in 2284. He was using the highly unstable protomatter, shown here, to be beamed onto another barren planet to quickly transform and terraform this kind of world into a lush green one within hours, kind of like what the landscaping crews do out here. So this was a planet building device that the Klingons really desperately wanted, and once you put it on a barren place, it would make it into a Earth-like place, a Class M planet, within hours. David was killed by the Klingons in 2285, refusing to let them use it. Spock also lost his life in the process trying to save the Enterprise, and here he is right here. This is when he tells me, I shall always be your friend, right here. So, actually we lost Spock, but when we sent him back to this revitalized planet, he was able, in one of those photon tubes, he was able to grow back into a regular person within hours because of this planet's revitalization abilities. And all this was set up by my nemesis, Khan, or Khan Noonien Singh, who was a product of late 20th century genetic engineering with superhuman capabilities. We marooned him and his Botany Bay crew on a desolate planet, and he wanted maximum revenge for this. We would actually meet 3 times, and each time it would really do a number on me. Although his lustful need for revenge would chase me to the gates of perdition. And this is where I would scream, "Time." So let me tell you about the movies. These were Hollywood movies. The first one that came out was the motion picture, where we dealt with a V'ger, or a Voyager that ran amok. The second movie was The Wrath of Khan. The third one was the Search for Spock right here. Something to say about that. We would search for Spock, rescuing him from the planet he was reborn on. To do this, I had to steal a Federation starship, thereby disobeying orders. You see, I became Admiral in 2269 in charge of fleet operations, but but demoted to captain permanently in 2286 for stealing that starship and saving Earth from alien onslaught. So, search for Spock here, and we were able to steal that starship, and then actually find another Romulan one, and get it back to Earth in Star Trek 4, and in Star Trek 5, The Final Frontier. Where actually, things didn't go right there very well for me. You see, rules are for other people and really don't apply to me. Sometimes I would lie on official reports and mask the truth. I would often bend the rules to increase my chances of winning. I used blind luck to play dice with God and got out of intense, sticky situations. Some say that I don't respect the chair. Others are jealous that I'm cunning and resourceful and use every trick of the book to save my crew and ship. My tactics used over the course of my career would later become required reading for cadets at the Academy. That's how we got the term Space Cadet.
Wow.
In essence, I really married my ship, and I would do anything to get her out of impending doom and destruction. And this is why I never got involved with any woman on a long-term basis. My allegiance was always with my crew, the ship, and to the Federation. However, my love for the Enterprise was a frozen fire, my one desire. I knew I couldn't get much higher, I couldn't be a liar, so my love became a funeral pyre. As for management, there's no management at all for me. I just take direct action and double down on everything I do. For me, it's not 1, 2, 3, 4. It's 1, 2, 3, 14, 28, 56, 112, 224. When most of you go somewhere, you visit the place. When I go somewhere, I own it and stamp my DNA on everything I see. I'm let loose like a deuce. I'm chrome-wheeled, fuel-injected, and stepping out over the line. And know this, that I am your future. Now, in the later movies, we would, in Discovery Country, run into Spock's brother, and this is where I actually died in this movie here. This can be a bit confusing. I died in 2293, saving the Enterprise from threatening really an anomaly that would come up, an energy anomaly. I was reborn here. So we're going to get to this in a minute, how this happened. Reborn in this movie. There will be 3 rebooted movies of me, done about 10 years ago with a different timeline called the Kelvin timeline. This would be The Future Begins, Star Trek, Into Darkness, with Khan again, and Star Trek Beyond. These were me, these are about me, but a slightly different, younger me, to explain my background and have a little different scenario. Now, in the movie Generations, I died, but was caught up and swept up when I died into an anomaly, an energy anomaly called the Nexus, which I entered in 2293. So I died at age 60, but I spent 78 years in a timeless energy distortion and helped our next captain, Jean-Luc Picard, to outwit a villain. So I was like alive and I wasn't alive, caught up in this purgatory situation. And I actually died in 2371, trying to save a planet from destruction. I was fighting the evil genius Sauron, and a high metal walkway I was on broke, and I was ended up killed by that. So in total, I was 138 years old as I was trying to stop a deadly missile, trying to save that planet. This was the energy anomaly that would come in that I was swept up in. Over time, 10 TV series would be spring from my original Star Trek of 1966. They would be the animated series from 73 to 74, the Next Generation from 87 to 94, with 7 seasons and had 3 Hollywood movies. Deep Space Nine, here. That ran from 93 to 99 for 7 seasons. Voyager, 95 to 01, with a Jane Hathaway, I believe it was the captain. And Enterprise from 01 to 05. And Discovery for 3 seasons. Over here. And then Picard, that ran for a little bit. And the Lower Decks, an animated series. And more Star Trek Discovery. Actually, the old Star Trek series was syndicated mainly during the 1970s, 80s, and 90s, and would be put on superstations who would buy this. It was the #1 rated syndicated TV show for years and years. Superstations like WGN in Chicago, WCBS in New York, and KTLA in Los Angeles would make untold profits from this, tens of millions of dollars, by buying the series and then selling commercials on it. It was very profitable. So there was always an interest in Star Trek, despite the ratings that it did not have back in the mid-60s. And because of this, there is a lot of mass merchandising of Star Trek products, toys, games, t-shirts, mugs, action figures, all kinds of situations, and toys like this, for instance. All told, it was a $15 billion franchise over time. That's quite a lot of money, all told, with films, merchandising, getting the word out. So, Star Trek is popular because it's really a media franchise and cultural phenomenon way beyond science fiction. It's popular because it's an escape into idealism and concerns hope for a better tomorrow. You see, with improved technology, a winning attitude, and global unity, anything is possible. So what would Captain Kirk do? He takes action. That's what he does. And you can find out all about him if you look closely at some of the books about him. It goes into more detail than what I've shown you. So really, I had a great life, and I can't wait to get back to the future. Look ahead of me, I see endless camaraderie, heroic acts, fantastic adventures, and I know whatever dire situation happens, I know that my crew and I will eventually get out of it. So, all ahead, warp factor 1, Mr. Sulu, because space is the final frontier.
Thank you.
Thank you. That's the end of this. I hope you've enjoyed it. And does anybody have any questions or comments?